There are many examples of a tech company essentially completely taking over an established industry. But I think that happens because the established players, like you said, are so afraid of the tech that they wait and they dip their toes a little bit and they make a lab and they put a little bit of budget aside, giving the tech company years and years and years to basically topple the traditional player. That the three things that myself and the other execs at the Post are gold on is how fast do you move? The second one is no sacred cow. Don't just do things because that's the way it's always been done. The third thing is debate but commit. And these three pillars are the pillars of our cultural DNA that helps us to have a culture that embraces what's coming rather than run from it.
How much resources do you put in defining the right metrics compared to then work on them? Because I think that comes to the point that the difference between efficiency and being effective. You can do the wrong thing very efficiently,
yes.
but you're not effective.
That's right.
So how much energy or time
you should put a lot. And we have learned this the hard way.
Welcome back to this episode of the Sparkr Podcast, where I uncovered the mindsets and tactics of exceptional people in innovation, technology, and leadership. I had the opportunity to talk to Shailesh Prakash, who is the Chief Information Officer of the Washington Post and one of the most influential minds in tech. The Post is a big institution in journalism, as you all know. And in 2013, Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, has purchased the Post, and with that, an exciting transformation has begun. That's what this conversation will be mostly about. How do you successfully transform a traditional business into a digital powerhouse, with all its implications regarding culture, mindsets, concrete tactics, and so on? Shailesh has a lot of experience to share with you guys, and his track record backs up his strategy, as the Post is ranked the 8th most innovative company in the world, together with others like Amazon, Google, or Apple. This is according to a list published by Fast Company. So, without further ado, take out your pen and paper, iPad, or whatever, and be ready to take some notes from this interesting conversation with Shailesh Prakash.
You've been at the Post since 2011, and then in 2013, Jeff Bezos from Amazon bought the Washington Post. And I could imagine that there have been many kind of changes in mindset or culture as a direct or indirect consequence of Jeff Bezos buying the Post. Could you please talk a little bit about these changes in mindset and culture that you've observed?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's wonderful to be in Zurich. So talking about the change that has come about since Jeff bought us about 5 years ago. People often talk about the fact that Jeff has come to the Post and he has poured in resources to expand our newsroom, to expand our technology. And that is very true. And it's very, very important that he's invested in us in such a large fashion. But I think that the biggest change and impact that Jeff has brought to the Washington Post, beyond the addition of resources and so on, is the cultural change that has come. And there are many aspects that have changed culturally, but if I were to pick one, it is this whole concept of experimentation that he has really brought to the Post and has freed us up to be innovative and to try a lot of things that perhaps normally we would be a little too afraid to try. He often says when we are talking about something or are, somewhat hesitant to try something, Jeff often asks us, look, is this a one-way door? And by that he means, is this a door that if you go through, you can never come back? If you can never come back, then it's a one-way door. But if it's not a one-way door, then one should not hesitate to experiment. Because, by definition, an experiment may fail and can be ended. So that has freed us up culturally to try a lot of things that perhaps we would not have tried in the past. And then the second aspect, which is related to the experimentation, is to double down on things that work. Oftentimes you run a lot of experiments, but human nature is to continue to focus on things that don't work and try to keep making them better. It's important for us to also see the things that are actually working and then double down on that. So when we do our experiments, if you find a few positive surprises, what are we doing to double down on those positive surprises? So these are some of the cultural aspects that have come to be within the DNA of the Post since Jeff bought us. And I'm very happy to say that this is a type of culture that I enjoy working in, and a lot of us technologists and innovators and digitally savvy people love to be a part of.
I can imagine that this is a good, metaphorically speaking, a good soil where technologists and innovators can flourish.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So to give maybe a bit more context also about the Post is, if I'm correct, the digital traffic at the Washington Post today is roughly 100 million monthly unique visitors. Mm-hmm. And that is up from 20 million 5 years ago. So that's a pretty impressive 5x improvement. And I wonder how much of that 5x growth would you say is, or can one attribute to this cultural change or to your work and the work of your team in tech and innovation compared to factors beyond your control, like let's say Donald Trump being elected or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question. And yes, the traffic is now approximately about 100 million a month. That's the US only traffic. If you add in worldwide, it's probably another 30% beyond that. But yes, to your question of how much is this due to perhaps the cultural change, the innovations versus other factors, look, it's very hard to say. Being an engineer by training, I think the only real way to have answered that is to do an A/B test, which of course we can't do. And a lot of it also has got to do with simply the fact that we have expanded the newsroom significantly. Marty Barron is our executive editor, widely considered to be the best in the world. He knows what he's doing. And from him and his very talented team, we have made a lot of progress breaking absolutely groundbreaking stuff on what goes on in Washington, D.C. and how it affects the world. So a lot of it obviously is due to the great content we produce. But yes, there is an element to, the basic question of, yes, content is so very important. And if there's only one thing you can choose, it has to be awesome content. That is the product of the Washington Post. But in today's world, that Google has spoilt us with its speed. You have beautiful products from Apple and Samsung that have spoilt us with the beauty of their design. You have the convenience of Amazon and the customer care of Amazon that we all now expect from every other company. So consumers, of course, demand the best possible content, but you also have to have the best technology and the best design in order to reach the numbers that we've been able to reach. So it's hard to say how much is what, but they're all tied in together. The circumstances that we find ourselves in, the great content that we produce, and all the work that we do in design and engineering are all mixed in there to get that number. And then you talk about 100 million uniques, and that's just basically the traffic piece. We are also well north of 1.5 million paying digital subscribers, which has been another great digital story at the Washington Post. And those digital subscribers that we've gotten also serve to grow our page views. So people often ask, should it be advertising or subscriptions? In fact, in many ways, they are synergistic with each other.
I know that obviously you can't just say that tech is only responsible for that growth, of course. But the reason for this question was that I think I can remember that you once said that you have tools to automate or to automatically generate content in very structured areas like sports or maybe elections. And I think to remember that you said with being able to create that content automatically, you can create or cover topics far broader than you would be able to if you would just work with human labor. And that long tail of all this automated content is still very significant regards to your traffic. So that was the background of my question. Is that a true memory?
It's a true statement. It's a true statement. The product we have that does content generation, we call it Heliograph. Graph as in paragraph, and helio because it does it at the speed of light, because it's a machine. But you're absolutely right. Heliograph can't do a deep analysis piece, or it can't do an opinion piece. We use it in structured areas, like you said. We first debuted it for the Olympics because sports scores and results are structured data. And we use it very heavily during the elections. And so what the machine is able to do, like you said, is it can cover basically, let's say, every high school football game in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, for example. We would not be able to send a reporter to every game, or even if we got the data to then sit down and write about every game. During the elections, we can cover pretty much every race in the country based on the data. And so that gives us a much wider swath of content. It helps with things like SEO, especially if you link it correctly between the various articles that you have. It helps with instant updates. So it's not just the breadth of stories, but as things change, the machine can change it almost in real time. And it also helps with the breadth of platforms. You could do it on your website, your apps, of course, but it also in distributed platforms. You know, it should update in Alexa, it should update on Twitter, it should update on Facebook, etc., etc. So breadth of content, speed of updates, and breadth of platform, which then actually helps to free our very talented journalists to then focus on what they do best, to do the deeper analysis, to do, more opinions and so on. So that's the gist of it. And yes, I mean, it's a significant traffic driver, of course. Like I've said before, there are the head stories that are typically human generated that drive a lot of the traffic as our top stories. But then the heliograph generated stories, although each individual story may have very few users and very few page views, when added together, can yield a significant portion for sure.
This heliograph tool is part of a whole digital publishing platform, one could say, right? That's called Arc. And to me, this Arc platform kind of resembles to the AWS of Amazon, where you take something that you are doing anyway and do it really well. why not make it to or build it towards a software as a service for others and then benefit from that? Is that a true kind of comparison?
Absolutely.
Okay.
AWS is absolutely the inspiration for Arc. Of course, it's a much smaller scale. It's nowhere near the size of AWS. But yes, Arc is a suite of technology tools and products. You could call it a platform. It's more a set of loosely connected digital tools. And we call it Arc. Why? Because it spans the arc of publishing. So all the way from creation of content to distribution of content to analytics for that content, and all the way from images and articles to video and blogs, connections with Facebook Instant, connection with Apple News, etc. So it's really an arc that spans the needs for a modern publisher. And I don't just mean publishers where you're a newspaper publisher, but also brands, also broadcasters, any industry that has publishing needs. And in today's world, many brands, whether you're in banking or finance or in athletics or e-commerce, have publishing needs. So that essentially is the gist of Arc. And yes, Heliograph is a part of this suite of tools that we offer.
Mm-hmm. I could imagine that this work that you've done on Arc is one of the reasons why you were named, first of all, the most innovative media company out there by Fast Company, but also, and before you mentioned Apple, Google, Amazon, those obvious innovators that spoil us with great products. Even together with those in the list, you are the 8th most innovative company, full stop. And I think that is very impressive that a media company or a publishing company, which is a traditional business, is ranking so high up there. So why do you think that is? Does it come back again to the mindset of experimentation and those kinds of things?
Yes, and of course, it's a tribute to all the wonderful designers and engineers and all the very savvy, digitally savvy people we have in the newsroom, that we've got that honor to be ranked so high up. But yeah, essentially, if you boil it down, our aspiration at the Washington Post, like I was alluding to before, is we really want to be excellent in journalism, where our brand is very strong and most people will give us that we are a very, very powerful brand in journalism. But we also want to supplement that by being extremely strong on the product and design and technology side. And us, I think, being good at both is what has fueled that ranking to be as high as it is. And yeah, I do think that at the heart of our engineering abilities is one, we are very talented designers and product managers and engineers, but also that there is a freedom to experiment and innovate. And like you were saying, it's a very fertile bed for seeds of innovation to sprout and grow into healthy plants and hopefully become very large trees at some point.
Yeah. I just learned prior to this podcast conversation that obviously there also has to be the manpower behind it. And even though most people, I would say, associate Washington Post with journalists, publishers, you have today a team of 350 tech guys at the Post. Yeah. Growing from, you said, I think 100 people 7 years ago. So you also need to have the brain power and the manpower behind it. Otherwise, you can't lift that burden.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, we have a very large engineering team, but I also want to say that there are two ways of growing. One way of growing is to make a plan up front and to say, oh, these are the things I'm going to do. And for this, I'll need 50 people. And for this, I'll need 70 people. And here another 25 and so on. And typically plans like that fail in my experience. The smarter growth strategy is to begin with a much smaller, much more scrappy, much more aggressive appetite of doing things in various dimensions. And then, like we were talking about, find some of the successes and then double down on it. So yes, at this point, we are close to about 350 engineers, the vast majority of whom are dedicated to the growth of ARC because we are serious about it as a business. But it was not always like that. ARC at one point was essentially 5 engineers working to make it available for university publications. And as we've signed on clients, we've gone back to make the case to grow it even bigger. And that's how we are where we are. People often say, oh, how can we rival the Washington Post? They've got such a large engineering team. It wasn't like that all the time. It's just been the hard work of some of these people that have allowed us to go and hire more and more. And in fact, right now, I have over 50 headcount to grow it even more. Because just today we've announced that we now have a very large presence in Latin America. And it's successes like that that help us to grow the team even more.
That's really nice. And I think it shows that you are not here to stop, but to continue growing. And I wonder, Amazon is on number 5 on that most innovative company list. Yes. So how long will it take and what is your plan to top them?
It would give me great pleasure to take Jeff aside and say, Jeff, yesterday we beat Amazon as the most innovative company in the world. And I suspect it will give Jeff a lot of pleasure as well.
I can imagine it would be really cool. So we already touched on several topics like experimentation is one, corporate culture. What I would be interested in is now also to talk about the transformation that you did from a traditional company or a company with a lot of tradition, like publishing or finance also has a lot of tradition, and moving that kind of business into a future-leaning, data-driven kind of company. So as a devil's advocate, it might be a stupid question, but still to cover the basics. Why is this a transformation or a transition worth making?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you want to directly answer your question, I would ask, well, what is the option? If everything is going awesome, you should still look at seeing what's coming down in the future. You should, in my opinion, never be afraid to cannibalize yourself. Otherwise, somebody else is going to cannibalize you. And there are so many quotes to that effect. Andy Grove said, only the paranoid survive. There's the book by Clay Christensen called The Innovator's Dilemma. And history is full of examples of companies who sat on their laurels only to see them get devastated in the long run. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, you should look it up. But I've heard people say, and I think it's true, that the only companies that have been around for 300 plus years, there are very few, and I think most of them are beer companies. So if you're in the beer industry, I think you're okay. But if you're in anything else, you better start thinking.
You always need some booze.
Always need some beer for sure. So that's the gist of it. Now, in our case, if you looked at the Washington Post maybe 20 years ago, then definitely one could argue that we were, pulling in the money hand over fist. But by the time I arrived at the Post 7 years ago, I mean, it was obvious that our classifieds business had been absolutely devastated by the likes of, you name it, Craigslist. There was a time, for jobs, LinkedIn, you name it, cars.com, pretty much everything that the classifieds business depended on. There were niche, pure play, digital-only verticals that had eaten our lunch. And I still remember the very first meeting we had with Jeff. He asked us, he made a statement saying, yes, look, I know that the internet has come and destroyed your business, but we also have to look at what gifts the internet has brought for you. And that's a very important lesson, I think, that is true of all industries. When a new paradigm, whether it's the internet or artificial intelligence or the rise of mobile phones or what any paradigm you look at, it comes bringing disruption, but it also comes bringing opportunities.
Absolutely.
And the culture has to be such that you must be poised to experiment in the coming waves as opposed to running from it and circling your wagons and saying, let's just retreat to higher ground and not play in the floodwaters that have arrived. And so in that world, I absolutely think that one of the things that the Post has been able to do has been to embrace the change and experiment with it as opposed to run from it. And that type of culture makes all the difference. Mm-hmm. And is it worth it? Especially in our industry, I don't see an option. There is no option.
Has been a very interesting answer to a very dumb question. Thank you very much. Excellent. And you mentioned not only to focus on the harm that new technology brings, but also on the gifts. And in that sense, I would like to ask you, what should people in traditional businesses, or maybe people in general, understand today about technology, how it works, how it will affect us, what kind of opportunities it brings? So obviously this would fill an entire conversation on its own, but what are some of the main gifts of technology that people should actually embrace and work with?
Right. So a few things. There are many parts to your question. Let me just touch on a few. First of all, I think it's important for all of us to understand, especially the executives at the highest levels of any industry, is that technology builds upon technology. It is not the case that here comes a new thing and there's potentially going to be some kind of a linear growth of that technology. And so we may not have to be the first mover, even second mover, 10th mover, 50th mover is okay. In other words, we have time. Unfortunately, in most technology trends, it's not linear. In fact, as the technology becomes more mature, you will find it'll have exponential growth. So you don't really have time. You may think you have time, but if you don't move fast enough, you will be so far behind that those that have adopted it will essentially have you can't catch up. Mm-hmm. Retail is a perfect example. It's not like the big retailers didn't see e-commerce. They just waited too long. Mm-hmm. And now the gap is so large between them and a player like Amazon that I would posit that most of them will never catch up, So, yes.
Yeah, I think that's a very great answer, because you didn't start with naming different buzzwords like AI or whatever, but a basic principle, a way of thinking. The thinking of exponential progress and not linearity.
That's right.
So I think that's very important. And you also said you have to move fast. And I think that's a good segue to a question I wanted to ask you, that when you have to move and make this transformation and transition to a more digitized or more digital company, I could imagine that there are different phases, or also, quite honestly speaking, a lot of friction in that process. Could you tell us about how you experienced that transformation in the post or in your previous career also? How can you deal with those frictions that will occur for sure?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, look, there's a reason that, you consistently have very small startups that start up in somebody's garage ultimately topple huge giants of the industry. What is it that those startups can bring to the table that these massive giants don't? It's not funding. I mean, the huge giants have a lot of money to experiment and do R&D and so on. I think that the biggest ingredient that the smaller, nimble startups bring to the table that the larger players don't is essentially friction. There are so many vested interests in the larger companies who have done things a certain way and done things in a way that have been very successful for them, that there's a lot of friction to try and then do things that might actually hurt the way that things have been done in the past. So with that, I'd just like to offer an anecdote that may be useful for other industries to think about. And it goes back to the philosophy Jeff has at the Post. I mean, when Jeff took over the Post, I talked about the cultural shift. One of the big cultural shifts that he brought is the way that we top executives in the Post are compensated. It used to be the case that our compensation, our bonus structure was based on whether you met or failed to meet your operating income. Revenue minus costs, operating income. If you met your operating income number, you made your bonus. If you didn't, well, you didn't make it. One of the first things Jeff did to change our culture, and it stands to even today, in fact, I'm going through the review process right now, and it's right there on my review, that the three things that myself and the other execs at the Post are gold on is how fast do you move? Those are the exact words. How fast do you move? The second one is basically no sacred cows. Again, those are the exact words. Don't just do things because that's the way it's always been done. Oh, we don't touch this. Well, because we've been doing this and it's been very successful for us in the past, so we shouldn't touch it. So no sacred cows. And then the third thing is debate but commit, or put another way, multiple paths to yes. And these three pillars are the pillars of our cultural DNA that helps us to have a culture that embraces what's coming rather than run from it. And going back to your question, I think they are very, very important, these three tenets, to understand, to study, and then to use to reduce the friction that often comes with embracing change.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like there's obviously a battle between, let's call it old and new, quote unquote, or one could maybe also say between the core business and potential future businesses. And you named incentives for the bonuses that can be a trick to address that that issue. What are your thoughts regarding the organizational structure? Yeah. So one sees different theories or ways of doing. Some say, well, the innovation team has to be completely separate, separated from the daily business. Others say, no, everybody has to be mixed so that the DNA is distributed equally or whatever. What are your thoughts on how to implement that in an organizational structure?
Excuse me, that's a very good question. A couple of points. First of all, I don't know if there is a clear winner that this structure always wins over the other. I'm not sure there is one, but I'll give you my own opinions. First and foremost, I think that the leadership of the company, which is where the buck stops, has to be willing to embrace change. It's pointless setting up labs and giving a lot of PR talks and so on if the core executive team that runs the company doesn't fundamentally believe in it. It's pointless setting aside funds to do it. It must come from the core executive team. And as a corollary just to that statement, I strongly urge that the executive teams that want to make the change should treat the person who's in charge of technology as a first-class citizen. Oftentimes, we tech execs get lofty titles, chief technology officer, chief digital officer, chief innovation, whatever it is. But in reality, they are not there for the most fundamental business decisions. They are still considered to be, oh yeah, now we need to bring the tech guy in to make sure that he or she executes the plan. They are not there in the making of the plan. So no matter what structure you choose, labs or mainstream or whatever, I think it's fundamental that the person who runs technology is at front and center and is involved in all the decision making. Because I'll tell you one thing, I enjoy that at the Post, thanks to my CEO, Fred, who's very tech savvy, who believes in tech, and of course, due to Jeff, as you might imagine. But I do see a lot of other industries where my counterpart has a lofty title, is probably very well paid and so on, but is not involved in the hardcore strategy and the forward-moving thoughts of the organization. That's important. To your question of, what are the different models, I happen to believe in the model where you need to not isolate a tech team or an innovation team in a separate lab or in a separate location. There may be needs to do that once in a while when you're building a new product, where you separate them out from headquarters and from the noise. But by and large, your brightest and best people should be part of the regular army and not some special forces division somewhere else. Now, because like I said, I don't think it's an option to tinker in a lab with a few people for an extended amount of time, because you don't have that much time. That whatever is coming at you will either turn out to be a fad, or if it establishes, will move very, very quickly. And if you take too long, you will not be able to catch up. It's very hard to catch up.
I think exactly to that point that I could imagine that many traditional businesses think today or have the impression that the race is lost anyway. And to them, tech is daunting. It's kind of, we've lost it anyway. However, I could imagine that it's easier to become excellent in tech in addition to being excellent at your core business than being excellent in tech, and then just kind of copy the, let's say, 100-year-old DNA of your core business.
Yes.
So how do you think about that? Is it harder to become excellent in tech or harder to become excellent in a core business?
I think the becoming, for a tech company to become excellent in a established core business is, I think, very, very hard. Now, obviously, there are many examples of a tech company essentially completely taking over an established industry. But I think that happens because the established players, like you said, are so afraid of the tech that they wait and they dip their toes a little bit and they make a lab and they put a little bit of budget aside and then they circle the wagons, giving the tech company years and years and years to basically topple the traditional player. So to your point, I do think that, say, in the publishing industry, in my opinion, it's easier for the Washington Post to become an excellent tech and design and product player than for one of the tech companies to become an excellent content producer, especially in the news and information world. And, the examples are so many. Fake news is a perfect example, But I want to make one point there about this whole point of, daunting and how to overcome it. Look, it's a little bit of a simplification, but in general, per industry, there are two types of tech, I think. One is the plumbing. What is your basic bread and butter that you need to use to do your business? And the second is, where you really want to differentiate yourself. And what I find in many of the traditional industries, especially in the news and publishing industry, but I suspect it's true in other places too, that these players have gotten so behind in the plumbing itself that even though the senior leadership of the company has a fairly clear idea on what their differentiator is, that the engineering team is so overwhelmed with the plumbing and keeping it up to date and upgrading it and dealing with the 500 vendors that constitute that plumbing, that they are not able to make any progress at all in the differentiator. And that leads to all the frustration of IT being a glue factory and nothing comes on time and all that. Those people are drowning in just keeping the plumbing going. And so that's my point if you choose publishing, for example. I do think that it might make sense for if publishing is what we are talking about, is to let the basic plumbing of publishing be done with a relatively modern player who supplies an end-to-end system, and then use your scarce engineering, high-powered, high-paid, smart engineering resources to really work on the differentiator that you want to do. That differentiator could be in a hardcore engineering area like AI, but you can't put two people in AI and say, oh, we will figure out how to do, intelligent banking or something like it. It can't be done like that. And so is it an option for you to get your basic plumbing to be managed by another vendor, a modern vendor, not 300 vendors, but a relatively large player, so that you can focus on your core with engineering talent, with sufficient numbers, that you might actually end up making decent returns. So,
and the talent, and what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is the talent that you have in your corporation would be wasted if it has to just be working on the plumbing itself all the time.
That's right.
But the plumbing needs to be done perfectly well, of course.
You want a modern stack. You want an integrated stack. Hopefully from a few vendors, not like a plethora of them who are all constantly upgrading, and you have a large staff trying to make it all work together. But hopefully a modern stack, hopefully not too many vendors. And it's not like you don't keep anybody of your own to work on that system, but that shouldn't be the majority of your focus, because then you will struggle in what your true differentiator is. So.
I hope you are enjoying this episode so far. If you like what you hear, why not collaborate with Sparkr on your next business event? Sparkr drives strategy and innovation workshops forward as a goal-oriented facilitator. And Sparkr can also contribute to your next high-caliber conference as moderator or speaker. If you want to learn more, visit www.sparkr.ch/moderation. You find the link in the description of this episode. And now back to the rich conversation of this Sparkr podcast.
It doesn't matter if we talk about the plumbing or the shiny differentiators. No matter what we talk about, experimentation that you mentioned a couple of times now is a good way forward to make progress on plumbing and the differentiators. And so at the headlines at the Washington Post, you do a lot of experimentation. For example, what kind of headline works best, or what kind of paywall works best, and so on. Maybe if you abstract from your own business of publishing, can you kind of recommend something in regards to experimentation? What kind of circumstances are needed to conduct experiments successfully? Be it technology-wise or cultural-wise? Is there some very important basics to get right?
The metrics. The heart of it is metrics. In order to be able to understand whether an experiment worked or failed, there has to be a good understanding, a simple understanding, not a complicated one. It has to be simple, of what are the metrics of success or failure. That is by the way, that's a very hard thing to do, to understand what is the metric of success for a particular experiment.
May I ask you, right on that point, how much time, or relatively speaking, how much resources do you put in defining the right metrics compared to then work on them? Because I think that comes to the point that the difference between efficiency and being effective. Yes. You can do the wrong thing very efficiently, yes, but you're not effective.
That's right.
So how much energy or time
you should put a lot. And we have learned this the hard way. We have shifted significantly to being a company that is not afraid to experiment, but it took us another iteration to understand that it doesn't mean that you just put as many experiments out there, because then it becomes very confusing to kill the experiment. You should not have lots and lots and lots of experiments running forever, because then it becomes another headache to manage. And at least in our case, we run these experiments with real users. We split the traffic to do it. And there's only so much that you can split when you have 100, the pie is 100%. If all these little things take 5% here, 6% here, 7% here, 8% here, and then you reach a point where you have to add another piece on top of the existing 5%, it becomes very confusing. So yes, it takes time. It's hard to do. And I do think it's worth spending the time to, one, get the metrics right. And I think they should be simple. If they are too complicated, nobody understands it. And more importantly, you'll probably mess up in measuring it. So it should be fairly simple, the metrics, simple to understand, simple to implement, but do get it set up front. And if you're able to do that, then like you said, I think it becomes much easier to also force what is the true north that you are heading towards. So if the true north you're heading towards is revenue from subscriptions, then it's one of the things I do is look across the experiments we run and see how many of those experiments are attempting to increase that number. And that gives you some coherence of what's the area that you're experimenting in, and what are all the other experiments that are important and interesting, but perhaps, are not serving us as well as they should. Because there is definitely, keep in mind that when you do a cultural shift, you can make the pendulum go too far. And that too will hurt you. And what that will do, I think, in most industries, certainly in our industry, is it will make the people who were causing the friction say, I told you, this is a bad idea. Look what's going on. It's crazy. You think that experiment A, B, F, G, N, do you even understand what it is? See, it's crazy. Let's just go back to doing what we know. So having some coherence is important for sure. And metrics, I think, are at the root of it.
And this thoughtfulness with planning experimentation, how would you maybe again, from a organizational perspective, how do you coordinate that? I mean, is it the C-level that says these are the metrics and everybody has to execute, or on a team level, does also the team have the authority to do experiments? How do you coordinate that in a company?
So ideally, you of course want the top level of the company to sort out what is true north, have the second level of metrics of what the true north actually means, and then for the rest of the teams to go off of that. Unfortunately, I personally think that is fiction. It's very hard that if you take 5 executives from any top company, take them separately and say, name the top 2 metrics, that they will all coherently say the same thing. Maybe there are some companies like that, but I haven't seen too many. So yeah, you may get 1 or 2 metrics from the top, but there will be many that should come from the innovation and, smart creatives in the company. And so, to put a fine point on that, it goes back to the multiple paths to yes. Somebody working as a product manager, 3 levels removed from the CTO, should not get stuck in getting his or her ideas to be able to be experimented upon. If his or her boss says no, there should be other paths to get to yes. And so it's a mix, I think. 1 or 2 of the top metrics can certainly and will probably come from the top of the company. But to assume that, the set of metrics that drive the company forward is all going to be thought of by the executives is probably not the model that actually happens, nor I think is a model that you want. You want the actual doers and the smart creatives to come up with ways in which to push the organization. Sometimes within boundaries, but, in general, push it forward. Talking about subscriptions, for example. Our true north is subscriptions. We set the metrics of how much we want to grow, et cetera, et cetera. But, what does it mean? Does it mean subscriptions just for our news product? Or should we have a new vertical that talks about travel and you do subscriptions for that? It's within the realm of subscriptions, but it's certainly very different in terms of the product that you build and the metric that you'll measure, So
I think we could go on and on that topic alone.
Yes.
I would like to focus a little bit or make a deep dive, so to speak, on one experiment that you are doing at the Post, which is experimenting with AI. I think that you are, a lot of the experiments you do have nothing to do with AI, but there are some where you are experimenting with it. And now, when you look at recommendation engines, for example, obviously many recommendation engines we know, be it Netflix or Spotify or Amazon, etc., they are built to show you more of what you like. And this is something problematic or very interesting challenge in journalism, because I think one could argue that a recommendation engine in journalism should not show you more of what you like, but maybe broaden your horizons, expose you to different opinions. You already mentioned fake news yourself earlier in that conversation. So what are your thoughts on how AI could maybe help to burst those filter bubbles instead of creating them with recommendation engines? Is that something you can talk about? And if not,
we have experimented with something. Now, unfortunately, the numbers are not very strong, but I'll tell you what we have tried. And I'll also tell you a few other thoughts that we are working on. So we came up with this product. We called it Counterpoint. Okay. And the whole thing was, if there was a piece on the Washington Post that had a certain opinion, not even, mostly opinion pieces, basically, then could we show as a counterpoint, and we can talk about the UX, a story that had a different opinion, not necessarily opposite opinion, but a different opinion. And in some cases, three. Simple things like who's responsible for the great economy of the United States? Is it the current president? Is it the past president? Is it the Fed? Or is it just, things are going well organically? And sometimes the Post gets a reputation of being a little bit more liberal, but in fact, our opinions, and you can check it out, have a very wide variety that they talk about. So first of all, you need enough content for this to work. And we found we have enough diverse content. So the machine would figure out things like, is this a left leaning? Is this a right leaning? What is it talking about? And then go and find other articles that either were opposite or at least not in the same direction as this article, and automatically put that in the body of what you were reading. We tried two UXs. One was you went into that article, you were reading it, and right there, just like an ad, you would see, here's a counterpoint. And we tried to build a certain UX for counterpoints that you would recognize in the future. The other UX was within the recommendation engine, if we showed an article, right next to it, we would say, and here's a counterpoint to click here. What we found is that, unfortunately, readers' behavior is they want to read more of the same type. So I'm not saying the click-throughs were zero, but whether it was a relatively left-leaning article that was showing a right-leaning opinion, or a right-leaning article that was showing a left-leaning opinion, people would not typically click through. Mm-hmm. So this is, the filter bubble is an issue, is definitely an issue.
But that kind of sounds like the filter bubble is less a product of a platform, but more a result of human nature or kind of a human psychology.
That's true. Although, again, this is an opinion. I don't know if it's scientific fact. I do think that the filter bubble, the base of it is, at least at this point in time, us humans trying to validate what we think the world should be, for sure. But the platform can make it much worse. If you look at social media, there, the filter bubble is not just the recommendation engine that shows you stuff, but people like you, who you are friends with, also sending you stuff to accelerate your, opinion on that topic. So it's absolutely the case that I think people are at the heart of it, but I think social media platforms surface stuff much more because they are much more people-centric than an algorithmic-centric thing. Because at least in our algorithmic science, I agree that, you can't make somebody click on something he doesn't want to, but you certainly don't have to promote the viral stories that all your friends are pushing as well, So there is more diversity, perhaps not in the exact same topic you're looking for, but in other subjects that could come in there. Mm-hmm. So
now we started to talk about behavior of humans getting information, how they read or generally consume news, etc. We had a very brief mentioning of AI. And now when we broaden up the spectrum a little bit and look boldly into the future, we said in the beginning of our conversation, technology builds on top of each other. Yeah. We can expect exponential developments. So that means that the way how we consume or interact with information in, let's say, the next 5, 15, 25 years will probably change drastically.
Yes.
So now we kind of are entering the brainstorming, getting crazy area of this conversation, because I would be interested in what are your bold visions or predictions how we will consume or interact with information in the future.
Yes. A couple of things. Distant future, I'm not sure. I tell my kids this all the time. I believe, so there are many different views on AI, right? I studied AI during my master's degree, and I had a hard time grasping, and it's probably just me, but I had a hard time grasping how this technology would ever be viable. Because if you look at the nitty-gritty of the basics of AI, at least the compute power required to get it to work at scale, you would need a supercomputer basically to do that. Even things like weather modeling, for example. The computations are so much that it was simply not feasible back in 93 when I was doing my master's, that you would have access to that compute power. Now, fast forward to now, and the compute power on my iPhone is so much more than the machine I had in my grad school engineering lab. And then now with things like AWS and the software frameworks like TensorFlow from Google and so on, you've got this access. Modest CIOs like me have access to compute power and software frameworks that now begin to make AI possible. So that revolution had to occur in order for us to reach into that, right? Now, having worked now for 25 years, and having had a sense of how technology actually develops, I tell my kids all the time that I fundamentally believe that in their lifetime, now my son is 10, daughter's 15, in their lifetime, the world will be fundamentally different. Fundamentally. Not like the iPhone came about or we got access to the web, but fundamentally different. And my son was asking me the other day, Dad, do you mean like I might marry a robot? Is that what you mean? Possible. Daughter wants to study medicine. There's this guy, Vinod Khosla, the founder of Sun, which is where I used to work, who went to, I think, Stanford Medical School and told those aspiring doctors that you guys should stop studying medicine, instead go to acting school, because the robots will run medicine and we'll only need humans to tell other humans the bad news about the disease that they have. That the robot may not want to do. So you, the actor, will have to go with a lab coat and say, let me hold your hand, and have the bedside manner. So, that's extreme thinking. But I fundamentally think that within the next 25 years, in the lifetime of my kids, in the certainly next 50 years, I think it'll be fundamentally different. And what that world looks like, God only knows. So with that statement, nearer term, what do I think will happen for the consumption of media? Technologies like heliograph will become smarter and smarter. And like we've been discussing, it could be used to worsen the filter bubble, could be used to make it better. I worry a lot that it'll get worse, especially if you're able to add the concept of deep fakes in there, where it's virtually impossible. You'll need another AI to detect that this is bad.
Yeah, just for the audience, deep fakes are, for example, videos with, let's say, a world leader declaring nuclear war to a country, and you can't say that it's a fake.
It's based off of your face, based off of your voice. The lip movements, your eye movements are synchronized and put together in such a deep way that a normal person cannot tell whether this is real or not. So if we have proliferation of those types, I think the policing of that will become very tricky and very difficult.
For that reason alone, a publishing company like the Post needs to become really tech savvy if they want to remain their brand as a authority on news and information.
And one of the things, which is what we are working on, is, this is an interesting concept just in general. Look, if you look at aeroplane or a car or even some commercial products that we buy, there's a supply chain that yields that product, or drugs, for example. And when there is a defect, you look in the supply chain to see where things might have gone wrong. But the point I'm making is the integrity of that product depends upon verifying the supply chain. Something goes wrong and there needs to be a recall in a car. They will trace it back to the airbag from this vendor that caused the problem. But there's an entire system built to make the integrity look good. I think that content needs that type of supply chain. Okay. And that is what will help with the deep fakes, because the end product will look like a deep fake. But if you can inspect the supply chain, it's unlikely that a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist from the Washington Post will have created that, So if you can have a way for a system like ARC, now we are going a little bit into the publishing world, but in our systems, we have this technology called WebSched, which is the planning tool for the newsroom. We know exactly what happened to that story every step of the way till it went onto the web or app or whatever. We know who the photographer was. We know which photograph got selected. We know when the video got added, by whom, who's the author, how much time did it spend in the editorial review, how much time did it spend with the copy editor. We know all this. And so when the story goes online, is there a way, maybe through blockchain, to basically say that the integrity of this story is signed by so-and-so? And so now what does it appear like on the web? I don't know. There could be a small gleam, which you can click on to look at the entire immutable workflow of that. Now people ask me, what about if I'm an individual blogger? I can't have access to ARC to stamp it like that. So those questions I don't know how to answer. But now we are digressing a bit. But yeah, in the world of absolute deep fakes, one way to look at the integrity of that would be to check the supply chain of that story, and then what else can happen in the world of, look, my wife and I, after a long argument, for my son who turned 10, we bought him an Oculus thing. He wanted a Xbox. We went one step further and bought him a Oculus thing. And, he's going to grow up feeling that those 3D worlds are natural. There's a game in there that talks about navigating space, and you go through and here's Jupiter and the moons are to size, the distance is to size, the color. So much different than consuming that content in text or in video. So how much will AR and VR augment the way that you consume media? I do think that it will become much, much, much bigger part of your diet than it is now in the next 5-10 years as the costs drop for these devices, or your phone gets better at it. Definitely that's part of it. And to generate that type of content will require AI systems. I don't think the way that those tool sets are done today, where your journalists have to train to take a story, and there will be a large part of it which is automated, which I think the machines will do better than the humans will. So consumption through new ways driven and produced by AI, Evolution of deep fakes as heliograph type technology becomes more mainstream and more accessible for everybody. The third piece that I think is not too far away with respect to AI is this holy grail of personalization. You look at Amazon's personalization, I've looked at it. They are recommending products, and you try to see how much of that technology works in news, and you have to adapt it significantly for news. Because like you said, news is ephemeral. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow. And something that is happening in Pakistan may have no interest to you today, but tomorrow, India and Pakistan have a close to a nuclear confrontation, and somebody sitting in Zurich now is suddenly interested in what's going on in Pakistan, and then that conflict settles, and they are no longer interested again. So it's very different than product recommendation. The news is very different. I think that, and we are working on this, I think that there are some secret AI learning that we will be able to work on in the next 5, 6, 10 years, that news recommendations might be able to get to that sweet spot of what you like versus what is new, where then you will be truly delighted with what you get. Because it's not impossible. I don't know if you have a close friend or a brother or a mother. I know what stories my mom will like. That's why I keep texting her stuff. How do I know that? How do I know that? There is some sense that exists because of the long period of time I've spent with her to know what she will like or what my wife will like. Or I send certain things to my kids. It's because I kind of know them. So can there be AI systems that understand you and therefore be your personal news gatherer? I think it's possible. It's coming.
These are very exciting thoughts to slowly but surely wrap up our conversation. But I still have one last question. Because with all of that talk about experimentation, the products you develop and are planning to develop and so on, what have been your best and or worst business decisions that you've made along that process?
I would say hiring, especially in the technology world. A great hire, Mark Zuckerberg calls them the 1000x engineer. Others have called them 10x engineers, where a single person is worth 10 or in extreme case 1,000 people. I think 1,000 is too much, but at least 10. And then Steve Jobs would say A class people attract A class, B class actually attracts C class. So hiring the right people when I've gotten it right has moved the needle. Conversely, hiring the wrong people can set you back significantly. I think it applies to all fields. It especially applies to technology. So many of my best decisions, worst decisions are around hiring. And the one advice I have, at least it's worked for me. And I went through all the formal training in Microsoft for how to hire and how not to hire, and at the post too. But I think you have to look at the data, but go with your gut. That's very important. Don't throw the data away, because your data may make you change your gut. But at the end of the day, if push comes to shove, go with your gut. Spend the time on the interview, check the references, but go with your gut. More times than not, my gut has been telling me something and the data is telling me something, and I say, I'm probably completely wrong and we should do this. Then a year later, you say, I knew it. I knew this was not going to work.
This son of a gun.
Now, there have been exceptions, but in general, the most wide swings have been that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. Other decisions, abandoning things before we should have abandoned them. killing things too early, and it all goes back to the same thing. Metrics were not clear, lots of people involved, pocket vetoes. Oh, he doesn't want to kill it. He's too difficult to say no to. Let's just keep going. We can't prove it's not working anyway. Why? We never set up the metrics up front. In other cases, pet projects where you say, oh, I think it'll work. Give it another 3 months. Let's tweak this small thing. Give it. Once again, no clarity on what we were trying to do. So your biases, keep it going. Costs a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are the things.
It's really nice. I have the gut feeling that people will very much like this episode.
Oh, well, I hope so. Even if the data says it didn't like it.
Always go with the gut feeling. So, Shailesh, thank you very much for your valuable time and this exciting conversation.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Shailesh Prakash, Chief Information Officer of the Washington Post and one of the most influential minds in tech. For more of these insightful conversations about innovation, digital transformation, change management, leadership, and more, please check out other episodes of the Sparkr Podcast. Simply visit the website sparkr.ch/podcast. That is sparkr.ch/podcast. Or you can also consider subscribing to this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to your most favorite podcasts. I'm looking forward to the next episode, and I hope you'll join me again next time when I'll uncover the mindset and tactics of exceptional people in innovation, change, and leadership. Have a good one, and see you next time.